Welcome to the Derek Diamond Experience podcast, where every week I talk about the inner workings of the entertainment industry with those who have lived it and experienced it. I am your host, Derek Diamond, and thank you to everyone who listened to last week's season premiere with voice actor Richard Epcar. If you haven't yet, I highly suggest you go check out that episode. It was so great getting to pick his brain about some of his favorite roles, how he got into acting, and really learned a lot about the voice acting process, which is a topic that I've dabbled into on the show, but not as extensively as on-camera acting. So I'd highly recommend go checking out that episode. Speaking of on-camera acting, we're going to be talking about that on this week's episode with actor Zane Haney, who recently starred in the film Unfix, which premiered at the Chinese Theater in Los Angeles a few weeks ago. And before we really get into the conversation, I do have to address something that has been, ongoing for a little bit of time now, and that is the strike that the Writers Guild of America has been on strike for a while, and now the Screen Actors Guild is on strike as well. So I'm not 100% sure how that is going to affect the booking of guests on this show. This interview with Zane that you're about to hear, it was recorded prior to the Screen Actors Guild going on strike. So I want to throw out that disclaimer. And I need to find out more information on that and how I should proceed going forward with, you might get a lot of roundtables and a lot of top 5 lists until, a fair deal is reached with the Screen Actors Guild. So just stay tuned to this show and to social media to find out that information. But as I mentioned, had a great conversation with Zane about his role in this film, because it deals with a lot of heavy subject matter, and it was really cool getting to talk with him about preparing for some of the intense moments in the film, how he got into acting in the first place, and something that I don't think is talked about enough, the chemistry that is necessary between actors, especially those that their characters are supposed to have been friends for an extended period of time. So little nuances like that is why I love this conversation with Zane so much, and hopefully you enjoy it as well. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Zane Haney. Here with my very special guest this week, actor Zane Haney. Zane, how are you, sir?
Fantastic. How are you doing?
Good. I appreciate you taking the time to do this interview. And I didn't mention this to you before we started recording, but my show has been on break for the summer, and you're actually
cool.
the first interview I've done in probably like 2.5 months. So excited to be back in the saddle. Yeah, and summertime's always good to kind of just decompress a little bit and relax, exactly, and spend some time with the family and whatnot. So I'm excited to chat with you on this episode because you recently had the premiere of a film that you starred in called Unfix that actually premiered in Los Angeles. So I definitely want to talk about the movie itself, but I've got to ask, how was the premiere? Because it was shown at the Chinese Theater, correct?
Yeah, the Chinese Theater, yeah. It was at Dances with Films. It was the first time that me or any of the other cast had seen it to begin with. So that was just a very special experience, just to be able to be there with them. I was sitting right next to my 2 main cast members, and it was surreal. It was so great to have everybody there. We had like a full packed house. We're in the largest theater there, so it was awesome.
And for people who don't know what that theater is, it's the famous theater out in Hollywood that has the handprints that are all around the theater. So that's a really, really cool experience. And how was the reception of the film?
Oh, it was great. I mean, it's kind of weird because it was my first lead in a feature, so it's like you're leaving the theater and everyone is coming up to you afterwards, just saying like really, really great things about the film, about the cast, and how connected they felt to the story. It was it was very special. It's very special.
That's fantastic. To backtrack a little bit before we really dive into the making of the film, because I've watched the trailer and it deals with some pretty heavy subject material
Yeah.
for those that don't know what it's about, but we'll definitely get into that. What was it that made you want to get into acting in the first place?
Oh gosh. Oh, I guess I was really into fencing and sword play as a kid. And I kind of got that from watching the movie Zorro, and then it ended up being like a national fencer, international fencer too. So I was always kind of like into the drama, the dramatic stuff, but I guess what really kind of changed things for me was when I was in high school. I got to be in a play called uh, what was it called? Oh my gosh, I'm trying to think. Neil LaBute. The play title will come to me in a second, but they did an adaptation with Paul Rudd, and I forgot who the other actress was. But basically, what really got me into it was I was playing this character of Adam, and in the play, this girl, she basically she transforms him. She makes him an art project. So they're like an MFA school together, and so she changes the way that he looks. He changes his like the way that he interacts with his friends, like the people around him, and basically changes all these things. It makes him get a nose job even too. So he basically changes himself for this girl, right? And then he asks her, was any of it real, right? At the end, when this whole art show's just exposed, which he doesn't even know about to begin with. So he asked her, was any of it real? And I kind of had that like experience on stage where I like felt all those things that he was feeling. It's called The Shape of Things, by the way. Neil LaBute, The Shape of Things. It just came to me. So he asked her, was any of it real? And I had that experience where I didn't know what I was feeling. I just kind of like broke down. I was like, oh God, what is this? What are these emotions coming up and stuff? And it was at the show. And then this girl afterwards, she came up to me and she was crying. And I was like, well, what the heck is this all about? And she said, well, I've felt that before. And I was like, in that moment, I was like, well, this is really kind of strange. That's something that I'm experiencing, somebody else can also experience. So I think that's the moment where I was like, wow, I can really do something with this. It's not just me that's changing how I'm feeling, but it's, people on the outside who witness the work and the characters connecting. Yeah.
Well, you bring up a great point too, because, and I know with this, you're talking about a play that you did, and it translates to film as well. When
Sure,
you
yeah,
see
definitely.
these powerful performances, because I want to say comedy is easy because it's not, but I feel like it's more difficult to successfully capture like a powerful emotion like what you're describing, and just to see it
It is, yeah.
affect someone, it has to be gratifying in its own way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when you're able to, you're doing like the work beforehand and you're digging deep into your past or your imagination or whatever it is, and then you like hit something, um, it's gratifying in a way to be able to be like, oh, okay, that's kind of the raw emotion that is the part of this scene, and this is kind of where I can place it. But it's difficult too because it's like, you may experience that one time, like if you're doing theater too, like you may experience that one night, and the trouble is repeating it, right? Being consistent with that. So it's it's like it is like catching lightning in a bottle, really,
Yeah,
when it
and I've
happens.
never thought of it as from a theater standpoint. And I've never really done any acting. I've taken a couple of classes and learned that my spot was more behind the camera. But
Right.
I respect actors so much in the sense that you were willing to put yourself, whether it's reaching back, like you said, into your past to pull
Sure.
from a traumatic moment in order to make the performance as authentic as possible. Like I don't know if I personally could do that. So I commend you so much for doing that.
You could do it. You could do it. It just yeah, it takes some practice, and you have to be willing to dive in there and address a lot of those whatever those deep, dark, tortured places in your soul are,
Right. No, no,
which
absolutely.
the character has to do in this film because it's all about confronting your past.
Right. And now let's dive into to Unfix. So how did you
Sure. Yeah.
hear about the movie and what sparked your interest in wanting to be a part of it?
I mean, it's I we had a private premiere actually, and sort of like the same question came up too. Well, I heard about it from my manager, and I was really just excited. I didn't really know anything about the project. I had no idea that it was about conversion therapy. I had no idea it was not in the initial sides when I was auditioning. But really, kind of what flipped the switch for me is, I guess I was just reading the character description. I was reading about Ari, and I was reading about, I'm really attracted to deep, dark, just very, very soulful material where I can I can really get a rich performance out of it. You know what I mean? And not just that, just to be able to. It's kind of like a privilege to be able to have that complex of a character, that complex of a story, and to be able to dig as we did and rehearse, and be able to spread that message to people at the end of it.
Yeah, and in watching the trailer, and I definitely want to see the film when it's more widely available to watch. But in watching the trailer and seeing your moment specifically, I'm like, man, what did you pull from? Like, how did you prep? Once you got that character, once you got cast, how did you
Yeah.
prep for that role?
Oh my God, there's so many things I had to do. It's a lot of it's a lot of research rabbit holes, like watching a lot of YouTube videos, learning about what conversion therapy is to start with, and then kind of the way that I approach it is I kind of like to blend however I imagine the character is to my own life, to like how I could see myself in it, or like what went wrong along the way, or how I didn't like fall into that to begin with. So yeah, to be able to like we were saying before, like look at your past experiences, look at your childhood a lot. That's something that I really thought about a lot because all of this stuff happened in Ari's childhood. So yeah, I was looking back to when I was a kid, and because I feel like when you are a kid, you're not really formed by society yet, and you're at the core of what you really are, right? So I mean, and I think that changes along the way. There's all these outward elements that affect how you're perceived and how you feel on the inside. So I mean, there's, oh my God, so much. He's a long distance runner. I ended up like dropping like 25 pounds for the film. I was doing I was doing this what is it called, My Fitness Pal,
Yeah.
and started putting in my calories every day. I was like, oh my God, fuck this. I cannot keep on doing this. There's no way. It's ridiculous. So then I ran. I even tried he runs and he smokes. I even tried doing that. I mean, not that I'm like necessarily like method, but I think it really helps like putting yourself into that character's shoes. One thing was like during the pandemic. So it was right when my roommate had left me. He moved out to New York, and I had a lot of time alone to kind of just like ruminate and think about that. And in the film, they're isolated. I mean, Ari's certainly isolated, and his own world, really. Um, so that helped. I read this great book. What is it called? I'll think of that one too. But basically about like digging up the trauma from your past. The body keeps a score, and like where you hold trauma in your body. So thinking a lot about that, where Ari particularly holds that. Um, yeah, just every outlet that I could possibly find to dig. I had a lot of time, which was really nice. To be able to connect with the central cast too. We would like off the screen, we would spend a lot of time together, and I think that ultimately, like in the filming of it, it shows how close we were, kind of like as a unit, because we really developed that over time. It's like it's a and a very authentic relationship. So
Well,
yeah,
I,
a ton of those things.
well, I think it's important too, for the cast as well as the crew, no matter if you're a small, like if you're doing a small short or if you're doing a feature, to
Mhm.
spend time together because you're going to be working together and spending a lot of time together.
Yeah,
And I
yeah, yeah.
imagine, especially with actors, you build that almost natural camaraderie whenever you spend time together, and then it translates on screen because the audience, the ones that are smart enough can tell the difference between people that have
Mhm.
just been kind of thrown together and
Yeah,
they don't mix, whereas like you mentioned,
yeah.
spending time with
That's what
your fellow actors.
it's it's so important. That's why casting is so important too, because you have to, especially with a story like this, you have to be able to get really, really, really close and personal. Like maybe the most that I've ever been in my life with another person. And how could you do that? That's our job as actors. But I mean, how could you do that with somebody that you just met? You know what I mean? Like you just met, and then you're supposed to sell that you've been together for 15 years. You know,
Yeah,
because if that doesn't work, I mean, you just start getting all these like these cracks in the story and like the authenticity of like the characters and their relationships, and ultimately like once you have that, like once you don't believe it, like are you gonna how are you gonna how is something that you don't believe, how is that going to affect you? Not really.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you can't replicate, like you mentioned, 15 years of friendship with a 2 minute meeting or a 5 minute
Mhm.
meeting. You
Yeah,
gotta you gotta mesh, and the way you do that is you network, you
yeah,
connect, you even if it's hanging out and going to a restaurant and having a couple of drinks or having
yeah,
dinner. It's
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, we also cooked dinner for each other too, which was nice.
yeah. No, and that's an even better way to do it too. That's classic fellowship.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I was interested, in reading the description of the film that, the pandemic is incorporated into the story. And
Mhm.
I guess it's surprising to me because I know that films were made during the pandemic and even, as things were starting to get a little better, but people were still being very cautious with masks and whatnot. I've never, I won't say never, but I've very rarely seen the pandemic be incorporated into a film.
Yeah.
So how was that process? Did it seem like it hit a little too close to
Weird
home?
at first. It's like, oh, like who wants to, another, who wants to relive this, part in your life? You know what I
Right.
mean? Like nobody wants to think about that. It's like the escapist mentality. Why do I want to go back to that period, which like for a lot of people caused so much like anguish.
Hmm.
So, but I think that just like added to that element of claustrophobia that all these characters have. And I don't think it would have worked as well if it wasn't set in the pandemic, weirdly enough. But I'm actually wondering if our director had this story formed before the pandemic and was just like, well, that just happened, so why don't we just sprinkle that on there too? Because I mean, it's just more and more and more just constriction of these characters, throughout.
Well, I think also that everybody has a pandemic story. And so I think when you add that into this film, it automatically creates a little bit of relatability as well, because it may not be the exact circumstances, but everyone has some kind of hardship they went through, whether it was, losing a loved one or losing
Yeah,
your
I guess
business.
you're right. Yeah. That's very true. Yeah, and there's a whole segment in there where this is not really giving anything away, but like our characters we have a cafe that we own, and we lose it in the pandemic, and I mean, and it highlights everybody else losing things during the pandemic and whatnot. So yeah, it's a difficult time, but yeah, like you said, people can relate to it.
What was the biggest lesson you learned in making this film?
I guess it's a two-part thing for me. Um, I would say the responsibility of being like the lead character and like having the whole story about you. I think going into this film, I had never had that responsibility before. I mean, I had been in other features and stuff, but I wasn't like the lead, and the story wasn't about my character. So I think going into it, I really wanted to set a tone for not just like myself and my character, but just I don't know, for everyone, because if you're kind of at the top of this pyramid that is Unfix, right? It's gonna all trickle down. Do you know what I mean? So if I'm coming to work and I'm like showing up and I'm on it as much as I possibly can be, and I'm supportive of everybody else in our small cast and crew, um, then I think it kind yeah, like I said, it sets a tone, like it sets a kind of precedence there, and that was my goal in it, and I believe that we achieved that like collectively. Yeah, I remember I said that in the beginning when we were all doing like a table read of the whole project, was like, okay, how are we gonna, what do you want to contribute to this film? And that was a huge thing for me. Yeah, and other than that, it was just a huge learning experience of adaptability. Sometimes we had days where my co-star and I didn't know that we had to change some dates because of rain or whatever it was, and like, okay, you have to have those 2 or 3 scenes ready for tomorrow on top of all the other stuff. So it's like, okay, can you do that? And it's like, yeah, I fucking I better be able to do it. You know what I mean? And you just this character in general is the hardest, most rewarding character I've ever had to work on. And it was just a complete marathon for me. So being able to just like stick in it mentally, like physically, from like the running and like the training, everything was just totally exhausting. But those are the things that that you can look back on it and be like, wow, I was able to achieve that. Let's go. Anything else? Bring it on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that's something I was curious about too, with you mentioning that you had never been a lead in a feature before. Did you kind of look at yourself as you're one of the leaders on set? Because
Yeah.
that's something that it's like you subconsciously think about it when you think of like a Harrison Ford or like a top build star. Do they look at themselves as, okay, well, I've got to be a leader to these other cast and crew
That's a good
members?
question.
So that's cool that you had that mentality.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was totally my mentality throughout it. And that's a good point. No, I think a lot of the greats do. I mean, I think they understand that. First of all, it's not like just stories about me, blah blah blah. It's me, this whole ego thing. It's kind of like about where is it going? You know what I mean? Like, what do you intend to spread, and what's the most effective way to do that?
Yeah, exactly. So what's next for you? Do you have any other projects you're currently working on, or anything in the works?
Um, I have, yeah, I have a film that I completed, which is going to have coming up pretty soon. It's going to have its New Orleans premiere. I shot it over in Louisiana, and that is coming up for me. I got a couple commercials coming up, so not as exciting, but still, still exciting. You got to pay the bills.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So did you film the film in New Orleans?
Yeah, it's all
Oh,
filmed.
cool.
Yeah, yeah, we went back for reshoots too. So yeah, everything is looking good there. I hear they have a trailer now, so that's exciting. I haven't seen it yet, but it'll be coming out soon. So
Oh, I'll have to look into that. No, New Orleans is only a couple of hours for me. I love going
oh
there.
really?
Yeah, just I love the culture. The food is incredible. So that's cool. I'll have
Well,
to
if you're
keep a
only a
lookout
couple
for it.
hours, I'll invite you when we have our premiere.
Oh,
You
I'd
come
love
see
that.
it in person.
No,
We'll
I'd love that.
get some po' boys or something. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah, no, that'd be great. No, I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
What's as we start to wrap up here, what is one piece of advice that you could give to an aspiring actor?
Oh my gosh. I saw that gosh, it's a good question. There's a lot of pieces of advices, but my God, I would say, I mean, perseverance is the most important thing. Like with anything. Um, I saw this quote recently that it said, I think it said, I wrote it down. I think it's 1 second. 1 second, folks. Yes. Okay. Think about this. What looks like genius may simply be the result of persistence and variety. You cannot be doing the same thing over and over again. Your brain is not going to expand if you do the same thing over and over again. You have to switch it up. You have to be flexible. You have to be malleable. You have to be open to learn new things about people, about places, about whatever experiences. Yeah, you have to be open, and then you have to keep going and believe. That's what I would say.
That's a great quote. That needs to be on a T-shirt.
Right? I mean,
I'm
you
gonna
know what I mean,
I'm
bro?
gonna steal that.
It's true. It's so true,
You're
though.
right
It's like
though.
if you keep banging your head in the same spot, I mean, it's you gotta switch it up. You gotta figure out a different way, and get creative with it. That's our job, right?
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. Do you have a website or social media that you'd like to plug so the viewers and listeners can follow you?
Yeah, sure. It's Zany 711. That's
Fantastic.
at Zany 711.
Awesome. Well, I'll definitely
Cool.
put it in the show notes too, so people can click on it and follow you.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah. Cool. Well, sir, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. This was great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you again to Zane Haney for that awesome conversation. Be sure to follow him on Instagram. The link is in the show notes. For next week's episode, I'm not 100% sure what we're going to do yet. As I mentioned in the intro, the booking of guests is going to be a little tricky due to the strike that's going on with the Screen Actors Guild. You may get some non-film interviews. I've been working on trying to get some of those. You might get a top 5 list. You might get 2 top 5 lists a month. You might get a roundtable discussion about a movie or something completely different. So stay tuned to the show and to social media to find out what we'll be doing for next week's episode. I'll put out an announcement either late this week or over the weekend. But until then, you can check out past episodes of this podcast at linktree.com/DDiamondPodcast. Everything Derek Diamond Experience related is in one location. If you want to subscribe to the podcast feed, if you want to subscribe to my YouTube channel, if you want to follow me on social media, everything is in one location, linktree.com/DDiamondPodcast. And if you could, please leave a review. The more reviews that this show gets, the more likely it is that someone who's searching for entertainment podcast will find this, in the top of the search results. So it only takes a moment of your time, and it costs absolutely nothing. So if you would leave a review, I would very much appreciate it, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever your podcast provider is. A review will be very much appreciated. But that's going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you once again to Zane Haney, and we'll see you guys back here next Monday for another awesome episode of the Derek Diamond Experience podcast.